For today's lesson, we're going to talk about roots. First, we're going to look at perfect squares. So in the table here, we have completed values for perfect squares. 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, all the way up to 20 squared. As well as -1 squared, -2 squared, all the way up to -20 squared. And they are the same because a positive times a positive is a positive result. A negative times a negative is a positive result. Okay? So square roots. The square root of a number is a value that, when multiplied by itself, gives the number. So squaring and square rooting are inverse or opposite operations. Every positive number has both a positive and a negative square root. So for example, the square root of 4 could be +2 or -2. There are two answers that apply because they both will give you that positive number. So we are gonna note it by, if it's just the square root, that means we're looking for the positive square root. If we put a negative in front of it, that means we're looking for the negative square root. If we have both the negative and positive outside of it, that means we are looking for both the negative and positive square root. So here we're looking for the negative square root of 49. Well, the square root of 49 is 7, so the negative square root is -7. For this, the positive and negative square root of 0.81. Well, I know that 81, the square root is 9. Now I just have to think about where would my decimal placement go. If it was 0.9, so if I had 0.9 times 0.9, I get 81, and there's 1, 2 decimal places, so 1, 2 decimal places, which matches what we want here. So that tells me 0.9 is the square root, and it is the positive and negative square root. For the fraction, we are just going to look at the top number, find the square root, and the bottom number, find the square root. So the square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 16 is 4. And we were looking for the positive square root. If you want to double check, 3/4 times 3/4, that would give you 9/16. Here, square root of 1.21. Well, if I'm thinking of 121, I know that the square root of 121 is 11. So now I have to ask myself, if I did 0.11 times 0.11, that would be 4 decimal places. We only have 2. So what that tells me is I'm going to move this decimal over, which now would leave me with 1, 2 decimal values, which is what we have here. So it's not going to be 0.11, it's going to be 1.1. Here we're looking for the positive and negative square root of -16. This is kind of a trick question. When we square values, we always get a positive value. A positive times a positive is a positive. A negative times a negative is a positive. The only way that when we multiply two numbers is to get a negative, when we multiply two numbers, is if I had -4 times +4, right? That would get me a -16. But these aren't the same number, so that can't be the square root. So in this instance, it is no solution. You can't get the square root of a negative. And then here, square root of 324, that's a pretty big number. Maybe you don't have that one memorized, but if you look up here, 324, square root is 18. We were looking for the negative square root, so -18. So now we're gonna do the same thing, but applying it to cube roots. So the cube root of a number is one of its 3 equal factors. So perfect cube is a number made by cubing an integer. So here we have 1 cubed all the way up to 10 cubed, as well as -1 cubed all the way up to -10 cubed. The difference with this versus the squares is that you can get negative values. Positive 1 times positive 1 times positive 1 gives you positive 1. But here, when we have a negative times a negative, that is a positive, and that positive times a negative gives you a negative. Therefore, we have negative cubes. So we're not going to be noting on the outside if we want the positive or negative. You have to decide what it is based on the problem. So the cube root of 125. Sometimes if you're not sure what it's going to be, I always think about that last digit of 5, and I'm like, what number is going to give me a last digit of 5 when multiplied by itself? Well, 5 times 5. So 5 cubed is 125, so the cube root of 125 is 5. The cube root of negative 64. Well, 4 cubed gives us 64, so the only way we can get negative 64 is with negative 4. The cube root of negative 0.512. Well, if I look at 512, that is 8. So I got to think about what number is going to give me 3 decimal places. If I do 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8, that gives me 1, 2, 3 decimal points. So 0.8 is our answer, but it gives us a negative, so it has to be negative 0.8. And last one, we got the fraction here. So the cube root of 343 is 7. The cube root of 1,000 is 10, so 7/10. Now let's look at estimating roots. So when we are estimating roots, we don't always have a square root that's going to give us a nice whole number like these, right? These are the only values up to 10 that would give you an integer when you find the cube root. And on the front, the same thing that would give you an integer when you find the square root. So what we're going to do is we're going to estimate roots. So we're going to say, well, I know it's in between one of these two integers. Here's a good estimate for it. And as a reminder, we've got this chart, and it goes all the way up to 30 in case you need that. So let's look at what we're going to do here. So we've got the square root of 29. So first what we got to think about is what perfect squares does that fall between, okay? So square root of 29, I know there's the perfect square of 25. And the perfect square after 25, so 25 is 5 squared, so 6 squared is 36. So square root of 29 falls in between those two somewhere. So that means it falls in between the number of 5 and the number of 6. And then what we want to do is we want to make our best estimate from where about that would be, okay? So we know it's somewhere in between 5 and 6, so it's going to be 5 point something. What I think about is what's right in the middle of 25 and 36. Well, 30.5 is the middle, right? 29 is less than that, so it's going to be less than 5. So I'm going to guess maybe around, and I'm going to put an about 5.4. Let's do the same thing here. Square root of 114. So we got to think of our perfect squares. Well, 100 is a perfect square, so the square root of 100, and the next perfect square is 121. So the square root of 100 is 10. The square root of 121 is 11. So I know my number is going to be in between 10 and 11. For my estimating purposes, I think about halfway between 100 and 121. So that would be around 110.5. 114 is a little bit higher than that, okay? So I know it's going to be past the 5 mark. Maybe it's around 7. If you said 0.6, that'd be fine. If you said 0.8, that'd be fine. but it's somewhere around there. Square root of 40. All right, that falls between the square root of 36 and the square root of 49. So the square root of 36 is 6. Square root of 49 is 7. So it falls somewhere in between there. So 6 point something. If I think about halfway between 36 and 49, well, 9 plus 4 is 13. So 6.5, so about 42.5. This is a little bit less than that, so it's going to be less than 6.5. I know that. So it could be maybe around 6.4. Maybe we think it's a little bit less than that. Maybe our guess is around 6.3. Square root of 7, well, that falls between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 9 is 3. So I know my number is going to be 2 point something. Halfway between 4 and 9 is 6.5. So 7 is a little bit more than that. So it's going to be more than 5. So we are going to make a guess of maybe about 2.6 or 2.7. I'm going to say about 2.6 because it's just past the 6.5 mark. 7 is really close to 6.5. All right, number 15, square root of 75. That falls between the square root of 64, right? And the square root of 81. Square root of 64 is 8. Square root of 81 is 9. Okay, so we know it's going to be 8 point something. Halfway between 64 and 81, it's about, so that's 17, so 8.5, so about 72.5 is around halfway. So when I'm making an estimate here, I know 75 is past the halfway point. It's a little bit further than past the halfway point, so maybe not 0.6, maybe I'm gonna guess about 0.7. Whoops. All right, so going over that one just really quickly because it was missing there. Square root of 64, square root of 81, square root of 64 is 8, square root of 81 is 9. So we know it's going to be 8 point something. Halfway mark is 72.5. It's a little bit past the halfway mark, so I guessed about 8.7. All right, square root of 190. Maybe you don't remember your multiples there. So if you need to go back to the front to think about what's going to be close to 190, well, we've got 196 is too high, 169 and 196. So square root of 169, square root of 196. Square root of 169 is 13. Square root of 196 is 14. So we know it's going to be 13 point something. Halfway between these two is 37. Sorry, it's difference of 37. So divide that by 2, about 18.5. So around 180, no, that's wrong. 27. So 27 divided by 2 is 13.5. So about 182.5 is the halfway mark. That's pretty far past the halfway mark, and it's pretty close to 196. So maybe I'm going to guess 0.8 or 0.9 as an accurate guess. So maybe about 0.8, because it's not exactly close to it, but it's pretty close to it. So I'm going to say about 0.8.